And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is here Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer James Huff, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the States. Greetings, Jon.
Good evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I just got home, so I'm a little bit out of the loop with the latest breaking news, but still had enough time to look at the BBC's latest announcement. They're hiring trainee journalists paid about £10 per hour, but only if they're from a black, Asian, or non-white background. I mean, if it hadn't been for the states, who would still practice institutionalized discrimination these days? But other than that, I'm doing just fine. I'm still surprised about how the temperature feels outside. I mean, it is 5 degrees Celsius, but it feels like -7.
Yeah, it's also rather cold here in Germany. It's also sort of similar deal that it feels colder than it actually is. It's somewhere like five degrees around there, but it feels quite cold. But it's sort of normal for this time of the year.
Yeah,
But
it's
at least
probably. Go
in terms of the political situation in Germany, things are looking up. As
ahead.
government has failed to be formed, there's no agreement between the three parties that were in the former coalition, the CDU-CSU with the FDP and the Greens can't are not able to agree in any sort of coalition agreement. So now it's wide open what's going to happen. But so it's probably either going to be a re-election or it's going to be a minority government led by the CDU. And in either case, they're going to get a fairly weak and sort of a weak caretaker government that's not going to do much, which is about as good as can be expected. So I'm happy with that.
Yeah, yeah. I was having this conversation. I had a public podcast last week, the Romanian language podcast. We recorded it in public, and we had Q&As. And I was noticing that almost all countries of Europe that have had bigger than usual economic growth in the last 10 years, they happen to have it exactly when their government were the least stable or preferably non-existent. I was noticing Belgium, for instance, had huge economic growth in that 2 year period when they had no government whatsoever. So Spain has had its biggest economic growth exactly when the government was the weakest. So it's I find it fascinating that the English language press characterizes it as it's a huge crisis and whatnot. Well, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's not such a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, it also means that bad laws can't be repealed, but currently they're making five bad new laws for every bad law they're repealing, and or for every good law they make. And I mean, for things to improve, you don't actually need the government to become better. It's enough if the private sector solutions improve, if the economy grows, if science improves, technology improves, people find more ways around bad legislation, around bad regulation, and as long as the government doesn't make things worse with a sort of greater at a greater speed than the private sector makes things better, things will improve.
Yeah. Right. Speaking of government not minding its own business, I guess we could go straight to the news section. It's remarkably long now, although not really that long as it appears on my prompter right now. So yeah, let's get into that. It'll probably eat the entirety of the show. I don't think we'll even get time for closing remarks.
Okay, let's start in the UK from the Telegraph. Do not refer to female pupils as girls or ladies because it reminds them of their gender, head teachers told. Teachers should not refer to pupils as girls or ladies because it means they are constantly reminded of their gender, the government's former mental health czar has said. Natasha Devon told head teachers of the country's leading girls' schools that they should be using gender-neutral language when they address the students, and added that the same applied for boys. Speaking at the Girls' School Association's annual conference in Manchester, She said that she would, quote, never walk into a room in an all-girls school and say girls or ladies because it was patronizing. She added, I don't think it is useful to be constantly reminded of your gender all the time and all the stereotypes that go with it. Ms. Devon said that rather than addressing children as boys or girls, teachers should use gender-neutral terms such as pupils, students, or people. Quote, I think actually in some ways boys are more constrained by the expectation of their gender, she said. And whilst that is being challenged and changed, I don't think it is helpful to keep saying girls, 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 boys, 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 because there's so much implication that potentially goes with that. Ms. Devon said that using the term girls can evoke a sense that they have to do everything perfectly, which can create a lot of anxiety in children and teenagers. Meanwhile, the term boys carries connotations of being macho, not talking about your feelings, being told to man up. She told head teachers, if your narrative is saying girls don't get angry, or boys don't cry, or girls aren't allowed to do this, or boys aren't allowed to do this, then that is potentially going to have an impact on your well-being. So I hope that in taking away the negative stereotypes associated with gender, we can ultimately improve their mental health. Ms. Devon said that another reason not to use gender terms like girls or boys is because there may be transgender people in the room. There are some schools that go into the single-sex schools, but there are transgender students in the year, she said. You can't presume that because someone presents the gender, that that's what they are. In August of 2015, the Department for Education, the DFE, appointed Ms. Devon as its first ever mental health champion for schools, but her role was axed just 9 months later after she made a series of criticisms of government policy. So apparently this writer is a misogynist.
Yep.
Because I
Yep.
mean, maybe she feels that addressing people as female is derogatory.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, normal people don't think like that, but apparently she does.
I mean, I have a very tasteless joke about this.
Please.
Go for it. It's a very tasty show.
Yeah. Woman gets triggered because you're calling girls girls. What a pussy.
Yeah. Notice this portion. There are some schools I go into that are single sex schools, but there are transgender students in the year. Well, then they're not single sex, are they? I'm just saying. You can't have it both ways. It's either a single sex school or it isn't.
I mean,
And
it could be like a girls' school and there's like a trans boy in that school.
yeah, but then again,
Because
no,
I mean that's the only, like, if you have the opinion that trans people that trans girls are girls and trans boys are boys, then calling them girls or boys would not be a problem.
yeah, yeah. Still, no. I mean, think about it this way: that there have been, I mean, for instance, in the English language lately, the terms like "you guys" have become gender neutral for at least 40 years now. I mean, it was gender
Yep.
neutral when I learned English, and when I learned English, "negro" was still an acceptable term. So there's that. Then there is then there is the practice, and I heard it mentioned I've seen it mentioned in the comment section of this article, but we all know it's real. I mean, in an old boys school, especially in physical education and things like that, sports, the coach sometimes addresses the boys as, come on ladies, let's do this and that. So these kinds of things with playing with the stereotypes and whatnot, and using these kinds of terminology has been around since forever. And if you try hard enough, I mean, the whole mental health angle is just doesn't hold water. I mean, at the end of the day, there were fewer kids with mental health problems 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Now, sure, you can partly argue that maybe mental health wasn't that properly understood 15 years ago, maybe, but still, it seems that the more education became uh, overtly gynocentric, the more mental health occurred, mental health issues occurred. So maybe either there is no correlation whatsoever, which is my position, or if there is, the correlation is exactly the opposite of what Ms. Devon thinks.
Yeah, it's certainly not a straightforward correlation that as you treat people more gently, there's less mental health problems.
Yeah, I think there is legitimately no correlation whatsoever. But if we are to infer one, it's exactly the opposite of what Miss Devon thinks. And to create a lot of anxiety because you address a group of girls as come on girls, let's write this or let's do that, or come on ladies, really, I just don't think that's the case at all.
I mean, it's just this sort of gender role phobia where there's any sort of suggestion of any kind of gender roles is automatically assumed to be harmful. And I mean,
Yep.
yes, there are harmful aspects to gender stereotypes, but there's also beneficial aspects to it. It is tremendously helpful to people to know that certain things are expected of them. That here's a particular model, here's a particular sort of set of behaviors that are expected of me, and I can orient myself according to that and have some sort of guidance, some sort of stability.
Yeah.
That's tremendously important for people. And just to say that because it can also have negative outcomes, you just toss the whole thing out is just throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, and besides, again, I know this is controversial to say, but the overwhelming majority of people, both men and women, turn out to be very, very thankful for their quote unquote gender roles. So no, I mean, it does not it does not hold water, the argument that it's harmful, because if it were that harmful, then how come even the most quote unquote progressive and quote unquote gender neutral societies are also by far the most gender conforming societies? I mean, if we're to talk about education, let's not forget there are more women per capita in STEM in Iran and India than there are in Sweden. So just saying, I mean, it's precisely the opposite is the case. The more you create or you strive to create what you think is a free society, the more individuals will make choices by more conforming to their quote unquote gender stereotype. So yeah, I think I'm gonna use your term gender role phobia because it really is. I mean, it just sounds like an irrational fear then chanted like a religious credo. Oh, it's a gender role, therefore it's bad. Amen. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some of these elite leftist academics who like to criticize gender roles so much can live without these roles, but that's something that's not really possible for most people because most people can't, sit around all day thinking about um, gender as a performance and stuff like that. That's not
Yeah.
something that most people can do because most people just have to do a regular kind of job and don't have time for this sort of airy-fairy nonsense.
Yeah,
They just
I remember reading. I think it was in the Guardian. It was one of the few mm, not overtly feminist articles, and I don't remember the author, but the portion that I do remember is this one. Most people don't have a career. Most people have a job that just
Yep.
puts food on the table, and that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, it is insane. Also, one more thing, and then we go to the next one. The term boys carries connotations of being macho, not talking about your feelings or being told to man up. No, it doesn't. It's a whole different thing to say, come on, boys, let's go to the football class. And it's a whole different thing to tell them to man up. Uh, I mean,
Yep.
can there exist two separate terms? I think they do exist. I mean, well, it's only in the mind of a militant academic leftist that these two are obligatory or intrinsically connected to each other. I think for kids and for experienced teachers that have been teaching to single sex schools for decades or at least for 5 or 6 years, I think they know the difference between the two, both their pupils and the teachers.
Yep.
Right. Let's go to the next one. Speaking of gender role phobia, I really love that term. I need to remember it. Coming from Newsweek, water is wet and grass tends to be greener during summertime. Well, actually, no, that's not the title. The title is Men with Muscles and Money Are More Attractive to Straight Women and Gay Men, showing gender roles aren't progressing. Gee. Muscles and
Aren't
money.
progressing. Hold on.
Yeah.
Aren't progressing.
Yeah. We're failing to be fundamentally transformed, basically. Well, actually, not we, gay men and straight women.
Oh, I guess biology not real.
No, biology is a social construct, of course. Right, and it goes like this, quote, muscles and money are qualities that straight women and gay men typically find attractive in men, according to an analysis of Tube Crush, a website where people just post unsolicited pictures of men seen on the London Underground. The study at Coventry and Aberystwyth universities in the United Kingdom, published in the Feminist Media Studies in August, analyzed images over a period of 3 years since 2014. The guy candy posted on the website were mostly white men, despite London being a multicultural city, indicating that white male privilege is still an attractive quality. The photos and comments focused on the men's biceps, pecs, and chest, as well as perceived sexual ability. Items that indicated wealth, such as smart suits, watches, and phones, were emphasized. Pictures showing other representations of masculinity, such as fatherhood and more emotional and awkward appearing men, were far less frequent. Well, there's a reason it's called awkward. The celebration of masculine capital is achieved through humor and the knowing wink, but the outcome is a reaffirmation of men's position in society, lead author Adrian Evans from the Coventry University Center for Post-Digital Culture said in a statement. The problem, according to Evans, is that although it appears as though we have moved forward, our desires are still mostly about money and strength. Through social media, one's private desires are being made public. Taking photos of men on the London Underground can also be seen as reversal of gender roles, since men have historically been unable to, men have historically been able to have more power over women's bodies. From smart-suited city workers to tanned gym goers flashing their flash, Evans said in a statement, the men featured in the photographs on Tube Crush show that as a culture, we still celebrate masculinity in the form of money and muscle. Public transport has become a place where gender politics is decided, according to the authors. Research has hinted at other qualities that attract women to men. Facial hair is in general appealing to women, according to research published in May issue of the Journal of Evolutionary Biology. But attraction to men during different stages of beard growth, clean face, stubble, and heavy beard depend on what the woman was looking for. Another study, which has not been yet peer-reviewed or published in a scientific journal, found that people are more likely to be attracted to someone who shares features of their parents. So yeah, biology not real.
Apparently.
This is another how do I phrase this? It's basically yet another evidence that feminists are just anti-men first, and second, as you said, gender role phobic. These are the main goals of any academic leftist feminist, because
I don't know. No, they can't be. No, feminism's got to have it right, because I've been told over and over again that this attractiveness thing that goes on is just social conditioning from a young age.
Sure. And
I mean, otherwise, you'd have this beautiful lesbian utopia, according to the radical feminists. If it weren't for those damn men making themselves so attractive, there would be this beautiful lesbian utopia.
For some reason, every single lesbian separatist commune failed miserably. So, yeah, I don't know. But no, what I was trying to say is that, especially in the last several years, as our voices as non-feminists became stronger and stronger and started to hold more and more sway into the culture, we've seen some sort of defensiveness from quote-unquote moderate feminists. I don't think there is such thing as moderate feminists, but anyway, they'll say, no, we're actually also pro-men. We just have a different approach, and we actually love men. Well, if that were true, then let me explain to me, how can you at the same time love something but also want to fundamentally transform it? It's just like with progressives in America. They say, oh, we love America too. No, you don't, because you want to fundamentally transform it. You cannot love something whilst at the same time wanting to fundamentally transform it. You either love it the way it is and think, well, maybe there can be some improvement here and there, or you don't love it and you want to fundamentally transform it into something that after you fundamentally transform it, maybe you'll love it. You just can't have it both ways. And considering the widening, the widening that goes into these kinds of studies, gender roles aren't progressing. Basically, uh, women are failing into being fundamentally transformed, and men are failing into being fundamentally transformed. That doesn't, uh, at least to me, that doesn't signal love at all.
Yeah, I mean, also it's just entirely unsurprising that given this site where it's all about appearance, I mean, these are strangers, you just know how they look like, that people would, or that women and gay men who visit the site would be attracted by superficial features like muscles and smart clothing. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, it's a website where you judge people by the way they appear in the subway. Uh, what a surprise! They're going to be judged by that.
Obviously, if you're looking for a long-term relationship, you will talk to the person first, and you'll see if you're compatible in terms of personality and values and so on. But if all you have is a picture, and you just question is just if this person is just sort of visually attractive, then obviously they're going to be superficial.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just madness, complete madness. Again, if there were to be indeed any love in there into the militant feminists, then you wouldn't want to fundamentally transform everyone. You only want to fundamentally transform something that you utterly despise the way it is now. It's just that simple as far as I'm concerned. Also, as James put it very well after I read the headline, biology not real. Well, yeah, I don't know about gay men, and quite frankly, I don't care. But when it comes to normative relationships, yes, women are attracted to men's power. It's been a constant for many tens of thousands of years, long before chivalry, and long before civilization itself. Basically, it's just the way it is. And the expectation that you're going to quote unquote move forward in just 10 years or 20 years of progressivism, or even 50 years of, it's just lunacy. It just doesn't work that way. Even if you are to believe that their goals are worthy of pursuing, and maybe their outcomes would be better than anyone else's, and even if you are to believe that, it's still unreasonable to, oh my god, after 20 years of militant bullshit, we still haven't progressed. Well, yeah, these kinds of things, I mean, they haven't progressed in over 10,000 years. They're probably not going to progress in the next 1,000 for sure. It's just it's just how evolution works. I'm sorry. Right. Speaking of things of that nature, of gender expression and whatnot, let's go to the next one, coming from the Daily Mail. Half of transgender prisoners could be sex offenders. Predatory inmates are falsely defining their gender to target vulnerable women, charity warns. Half of transgender prisoners could be sex offenders, with predators inmates falsely defining their gender in a bid to get access to vulnerable women, a charity has warned. Under new government proposals, adults will soon be able to choose their sex legally without the need for a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Experts are concerned this will lead to a spike in the number of trans inmates transferring to female prisons, which could put others in danger. The British Psychological Society has also warned that some men convicted of sex crimes have, quote unquote, falsely claimed to be trans in an effort to seek better access to females and young children through presenting in a female way, reports the Sunday Times. Between a third and a half, 41% of all England and Wales trans prisoners are sex offenders, according to charity Fair Play for Women. Recent high-profile cases include Davina Ayrton, who was jailed for 8 years in 2016 for raping a 15-year-old girl while he was known as David. But while experts are concerned about the safety of other inmates, there is growing public pressure for trans inmates to be allowed to serve their time in female prisons. I doubt there is any growing public pressure. Campaigners for the trans community say that placing such inmates in male jails is putting their lives at risk, and many even lead to suicide. 5 trans inmates in male jails have killed themselves in the past 2 years. keeping the story of some tranny. 8 men's jails specifically house sex offenders, with 46 trans prisoners in these alone. However, a large number of men convicted of sex crimes are housed outside of these special facilities, so the number could be higher. Based on a report of 118 prisons in England and Wales, charity Fair Play for Women estimated male to female trans inmates is about male to female, I guess, ratio is about 1 in 100. But just 13 of these inmates have been transferred to women's prison. Nicola Williams from Fair Play to Women said that the reforms to help transgender people choose their legal sex could have serious repercussions for prisoners. She told the Sunday Times, quote, trans-identifying males will become eligible for transfer to women's prisons, representing a serious risk to the safety and privacy and dignity of women in prisons. There is a conflict here between transgender right and the right of other people, such as women. What is shocking is that we're rushing into this self-declaration without evidence of its impact. So, while I'm pretty sure the more progressive, inclusive feminists will rush to say, oh, Fair Play for Women is a TERF organization and whatnot. Maybe they are. I don't know. I did not look them up. I don't really care who they are. They're still correct when saying rushing into this self-declaration without evidence of its impact is astonishing and not particularly a fantastic idea.
Yeah. Now, as for this claim that half of transgender prisoners could be sex offenders, I don't know. I mean, they could be, of course. You know, also, I don't know, the world could end tomorrow. It's not impossible, but, you know.
And besides, even their own report, I mean, I think this is Daily Mail's fault, because when they quote directly from the report, they say between a third and 41%, which is quite far from a half, actually. So the original claim of this particular charity is not really that outrageous. And again, let's not forget there are very few transgender inmates to begin with. So if there are 100 of them, I wouldn't be particularly surprised, considering that many of them are housed in special sex offender units. I wouldn't be terribly surprised to learn that 29 or 30 of them, that would be a third, almost a third, are sex offenders. It's not that hard. I mean, we're not talking big numbers here. So it's not hard to reach a third.
Yeah, that's true enough. Also, like with all these women's rebates that are getting tossed around in the UK, this idea that, you know, should abolish custodial sentences for women and so on. Maybe it may actually pay to just declare yourself a woman. Even if you don't have any sort of nefarious designs on to abuse women or anything like that in a female prison, just the lighter treatment might be enough for you to claim to be female.
Absolutely. And I would direct everyone to watch Philip Davis's speech on International Conference on Men's Issues in 2016, where he offered an entire encyclopedia of statistics of just how much better criminals who happen to be female are treated in the United Kingdom compared to criminals of identical crimes and identical record that happen to be male in the same country. So yeah, from that perspective alone, it makes perfect sense to try to declare yourself a woman. As for this, they falsely defining the gender in a bid to get access. I'm sorry, but as far as most people are, they all are. Not some of them, all of them. I mean, no, sorry, you are born with an XY, you're a man. You can say you're whatever you want, but you're still a man.
Yeah, but defining it purely in terms of chromosomes also gets tricky, because there are people who are, in terms of a phenotype, look, say, male, but actually have XX chromosomes, or they look and appear female and have XY chromosomes. Such cases do exist.
We can live with that. The thing is that this whole narrative is trying to make the utter absolute exception into the rule. No, the rule is the XX are female and the XY are men, and we're just going to deal with the exceptions on a case-by-case basis whenever they emerge, which they don't emerge that much because intersex people tend to be completely, quote-unquote, underrepresented in the criminal justice system, so they don't occur that much. How's that for a policy? I mean, really, this whole thing is lunacy. I mean, we're still talking about criminals here. And I think that when it comes to these kinds of things, sticking with biology and sticking with what we know to work is a superior policy than rushing into all this self-declaration thingy and yeah, let's be more progressive. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe jails shouldn't be that progressive. I'm just saying. I am just saying. Seriously, I cannot empathize that much. Well, I cannot empathize in general with the tranny agenda, but particularly when it comes to prisons, I think it's not a difficult case to make. And again, as I said while I was reading the article, oh, there is growing public pressure. No, there isn't. No, there isn't. I sincerely doubt. I mean, there is much more public pressure into reforming family courts, for instance, than for giving the quote-unquote right to men who seriously think they're women to be housed in female prisons. I think there's much more public pressure for the former than for the latter. When it comes to this issue, most people just don't care at all. It's I don't remember the term in English, but it's basically a closed loop. There are a bunch of activists who fight each other, and that's it. Most of the rest of the planet doesn't give a flying toss about this.
Yep.
No. All right. Enough about this. Let's go to the next one. Our favorite topic, sexual harassment. Go ahead.
Okay, staying in Britain and going to a more local topic, with paper getsurrey.co.uk. Sexual harassment at work. Tradesmen subjected to sex abuse monthly, but too afraid to report it, electrician claims. In the wake of the Westminster and Hollywood sex abuse scandals, an electrician has spoken of the harassment he says workmen face monthly. In one incident, a 67-year-old woman put her hand up her colleague's shorts and boxers while he was standing on a ladder and tugged on his penis and testicles. Simon, and his name is changed, claimed. This was never reported, and although the housing association the men work for are aware of the woman's tendencies, they're often sent to the property in pairs to be on the safe side. No action has been taken. Simon, who works mostly in Surrey, Windsor, and Reading, says he has been propositioned for sex on numerous occasions, all with women, been inappropriately touched and made to feel uncomfortable due to sexual comments. A woman in her 20s answered the door to him wearing nothing but a hand towel, he alleged, and then when he refused to enter her home, she dropped the towel and stood before him completely naked. She then changed to only a bra and knickers and hovered near the bedroom while he fixed something in the kitchen. He didn't leave because it happens all the time and he had a job to do. Simon laughed the incidents off and admits that although he's joked about it with their friends down the pub, others may have taken it more seriously. Quote, if I walked into work and said a woman had touched my bottom, they'd laugh in my face, he told Get Surrey. It's quite common for women to strip in front of you. Other men down the pub will say something like, "Cool, you should have tried it on with her, she was game." In this industry, people, if they've got a problem with your employer or something, they will trap you into doing something that they shouldn't do and then use it against you. You just pretend it isn't happening. He continued to say that certain tenants are known to the housing association as being sexually aggressive, yet the only protection offered to workmen is to attend in pairs. This, however, doesn't stop people, Simon claimed. This was the case when his colleague faced the before-mentioned horrific sexual abuse while up a ladder. The same woman had also allegedly attempted to force the men's hands on her breasts, rub their face against their groin area, asking to give them oral sex, and touch them inappropriately. But still they're sent to work at her house. Simon said he has known colleagues who, after making complaints against female tenants following sexual advances, have lost their jobs due to counterclaims. They've got no proof, and out of the door they go, he said. He added, you might talk about it in a jokey sense at work, but you wouldn't dare report something like that because you would get laughed at, number one. And number two, it's as a woman, if I claim to have been sexually assaulted, it can be taken more seriously. There's everything in the media and the moment about it not being taken seriously for a long period of time. When this specific period of time, it will be taken seriously and serious action will be taken. If a man, and this is from experience, was to claim that a woman sexually assaulted him or was inappropriate, and then a claim was to be bounced back to him, which is probably the main fear, who is going to be believed? It's not going to be the man. He said the only time he would discuss harassment or assault with his managers is to cover his own bum, essentially make them aware of the situation should a counterclaim ever be made. Nothing will ever be done about it, he said. Even if I asked for it to go forward, I think a lot of the time those companies wouldn't know what to do. They'd be like, what on earth can I do about it? Speaking of how he deals with it, Simon said, "I'm a fully grown man. I don't kind of laugh it off, go home and never think about it again. There will be people who are more sensitive than me that could possibly be upset by some of the things that go on." In a survey in 2015, male rape and sexual abuse charity Survivors UK found that only 3.9% of men actually report their experiences. The charity, in a silent suffering report, said it estimates that in the UK between 2010 and 2014, 679,051 sexual assaults and rapes of men took place. Of these, 652,000 were not reported to the police.
Yeah. I'll take the same position that I take about when it comes to most of these kinds of stories when they talk about women. Most of these incidents are indeed to be laughed off and maybe not taken really that seriously. Well, some of them they do borderline on sexual harassment. Maybe those should be, but some of them, I mean, yeah, she'd put her face on, put a hand on your bottom. If you are in the danger of having an accident, yeah, it should be taken seriously. If not, yeah, you can laugh it off. And I take the same position with women too, except when I take this position with women, I'm called a very, very horrible person. Whereas when I take it with men, it's regarded mostly as a sensible position to take. Uh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to cry for the mercy, or I'm not going to be I'm not going to feel very pitiful um, of women who say, "Oh, they were traumatic because they saw someone's dick at work," or for a man who would claim, not that this guy does, this guy doesn't claim that, but or for a guy who claimed that, oh, he was so traumatized because he went to someone's home and found them naked. Yeah, please, no, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stories, like the first story of the where the woman pulled tugged on his penis and his testicles. I mean, that's obviously
Yeah.
far across the line, and that's obviously sexual harassment or sexual assault, I would say. And obviously, it should be a criminal manner, but if
Or at the very least, a matter that the company would say, yeah, we're not going to work for your house again, period. Find someone
yeah,
else. That would still be a big step forward. I don't think it will be in practice. In theory, I'm pretty sure it already is a criminal matter, but I don't think it will be in practice because uh, I really like this dude that is interviewed, because he's like, yeah, and how are you going to prove it? I mean, other than always be recording, which is very hard to do in the workplace, especially if you're a tradesman. I mean, you have to get under the bed or under the sink or whatever to fix it. It's very hard to practice always be recording in those types of situations. It's much more easy in an office environment. But other than always be recording, how are you going to prove it? I mean, from a practical standpoint, it will not be a criminal matter anytime soon. And while that's sad, yeah, it is what it is. I mean, let's be realistic here a bit.
yeah,
So yeah, uh, I really like the guy that because he doesn't take a particularly dramatic stance on it. I mean, he's like, yeah, I understand maybe some people are more sensitive, but in the end of the day, most of these incidents are not really that bad. We just joke about them down the pub and whatnot. Uh, the, in my opinion, that's a far more sensible attitude to most of these incidents than what I've seen from many women who complain about it. Now, admittedly, some of them are much more serious than just joking about it. But you went to someone's home to, even if they were supposed to be expecting you, and you found them naked, well, just get over it. I mean, at the end of the day, that person is in their own home, and yeah, if they want to hang around naked in their own home, tough. The only dangerous part that I see is this portion that they say, oh well, if you complain about it, then they're gonna bounce it right back at you, and off the door you go. Yeah, I think that's dangerous, and I think that can be fixed. I mean, at the very least, the companies could learn to be more sensible and sensitive about these issues. It's much easier to reform a trades company than to reform the entire criminal justice system. I mean, the mentality of a few trades, of a few, I guess, policymakers in a small company like this is much more easier to reform than the mentality of the whole criminal justice system.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the problem is always just going to be that people are always more likely to believe the woman than the man in a situation like that. And I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah, I don't
I
know
don't know if
what
it
to
can be
do about
changed.
it either. I don't think it can be done anything. That's why I suggested that maybe trying to reform it company by company, especially with smaller companies, that can easily be done. I mean, you can explain, especially if you have more graphic details, you can convince one or two policymakers in a company of, I don't know, 50 employees to reform a little bit into towards a saner direction. Uh, but reforming the entire society or the criminal justice system, I don't think that can be done to begin with. At least not, I guess, not in our lifetimes. Um, it's just the way it is. Uh, and besides, overall, I would prefer an outcome that goes the treatment of the sexual harassment of women more to the direction of how it is treated for men than the other way around. I don't want men joining this whole victimhood train. I just don't.
Yep.
I think we would all be worse off if that were to happen. All right. Anything else on this piece of news?
No, let's go on.
All right. Let's go to a very long one, and it will still be long after I've cut from it. It's wow. It's one of those articles where feminists try to be sympathetic with men and fail miserably most of the time. And but it's still nice to read it and listen to it, uh, because of the way it particularly masks its usual male bashing quite well into behind academic and pompous words and whatnot. So, coming from the Guardian, the masculine mystique: why men can't ditch the baggage of being a bloke. It's basically, why aren't we progressing? Back in the 90s, it was all going to be so different. Not for our generation, the lopsided approach of our parents with their quaint post war notions of father breadwinners and mother homemakers. We would be equal, interchangeable. Our young women would run companies, embassies, hospitals, and schools, whilst our young men, no slouches, themselves, would punctuate their careers with long halcyon spells, dandling babies, and teaching toddlers how to make tiny volcanoes out of vinegar and baking soda. That equality would have formidable knock on effects. The gender pay gap would narrow, sexual harassment wouldn't disappear, but decoupling professional power from gender would do a lot to erase it from the workplace. A generation or so later, it is clear this is the revolution that never happened, at least not in the United Kingdom. The home dad pioneers among us who once blazed the trail now look on aghast as successive waves of men scurry past and say, right, back to work. What happened? Latest statistics for England show more than 80% of fathers still work full time, raising to almost 85% for dads of very young children. This rate has barely changed for 20 years. Sorry. The ratio of part-timers has flatlined just above 6% throughout this decade, having soared through the 90s and early 2000s. Just 1.6% of men have given up work altogether to take care of the family home. New rights for fathers to share parental leave with mothers have poor take-up rates. You can glimpse this paternity gap at 3:3 p.m. on weekday afternoons at school gates up and down the country. Far from being overrun with gaggles of enlightened men in clothes covered with baby sick and badges saying "world's greatest dad," the father quota is, in my own limited experience, disappointing. There are often more grandparents during the pickup than dads. At the same time, there is no shortage of surveys finding legions of men saying they want to find more time for family life. So what is stopping them? In 1963, The Feminine Mystique, a seminal book by Betty Friedan, helped launch the second wave of feminism by positing that women faced a problem that has no name. They had essentially become typecast as uber feminine mothers, homemakers, cake bakers, and sexual slaves to their husbands. That's why Betty Friedan is considered insane. Anyway, forcing women to live up to this idea of femininity left an entire generation depressed, frustrated, or hooked on value. That's actually not true. The question is this: 50 years later, are men facing their own problem with no name, a masculine mystique, which imposed rigid cultural norms of what it is to be male, superior, dominant, hierarchical, sexually assertive to the point of abuse, even though society is screaming out for manhood to be something very different? God, the ignorance. Men who do change their working lives to accommodate their children generally say it can feel tough, lonely, incongruous, even emasculating. When 15 years ago I gave up work altogether for a year to do childcare, it took a while to get used to being the only dad in the park. The strange man arguing with a difficult child outside the library on a damp Tuesday morning. People stared. Little has changed. Father of two, David Early, 31, from Glasgow, says he still feels in a minority when he's out about with his toddlers. When I'm with the children and I have her in the sling and him in the buggy, I have people looking and thinking, what's that guy doing with two kids strapped to him, says Early. This is a stigma when people see you doing a role that isn't traditional. It can impact on your professional life, close quote. For Ellie, it certainly did. When he asked for additional parental leave after his first child was born, his managers of his for his data management job were not impressed. He eventually quit and found work elsewhere to be able to balance his work and family in the way he wanted. Skipping a bit, and that's just it. Men are finding out what women have known for years that parenting properly will certainly upend your career. For many men, so thoroughly programmed to identify with who they are with the work they do, this can seem like an existential threat. Tormod Sund, 42, is a father, an anthropologist, a charity worker, a Norwegian, and a Londoner, and has been the primary carer for his son for more than 10 years. He says he still feels like a bit of an oddity in a society that still expects men to be alpha. The traditional man breadwinner, these kinds of ideas are rooted in the past, but you don't get rid of them in one or two generations, Sund says. Those ideas are still quite strong socially. When you meet new people, the first thing they ask is, what do you do? I would say, well, I work from home. The idea of what is a successful and normal if you are a man is that you should have a career. It's less acceptable for a man to say, I'm staying home with my children. We work, our identity is connected to that. The barriers are not just psychological, they are professional and financial as well. Jasmine Kellon, the human resource studies lecturer at Plymouth University, interviewed scores of fathers and managers trying to find out more about the male reluctance to reduce hours. She found that all of the working permutations, part-time, full-time, men, women, the part-time man was held in lowest regard on a range of metrics including competence, commitment, and even ability. In the workplace, fathers do not get as much support as moms, Kellon says. When they say, for example, that they need time off because a child is unwell, organizations are less supportive. There are quite a lot of negative perceptions about fathers who want to work part-time. The part-time paternal penalty is not just a British peculiarity. A 2013 study found that men who engage in childcare risk the workplace backlash. Men who lack complete focus on and dedication to their work and who do the low-status feminine work of childcare and housework are likely to be seen both as failed men and as bad workers, the report found. At the other end of the scale, however, Sweden incentivizes all fathers to take at least 3 months paid paternity leave. The result has been far more even-handed approach to latte papas. When I take him out to playgrounds or cafes in the UK, I'm usually the only bloke in there, says Miss Surya. In Sweden, you'll find a whole load of these blokes alongside you, which is false, mostly false. Well, it's technically true, but stay-at-home dads in Sweden make up 2.8, 2.9, 3% at best. Depends on the study you trust. Yes, it's still almost double than the UK. In the UK, it's 1.6%, as this article says, but still a minuscule minority. Back to the article. There are, of course, financial considerations. A great many households won't be able to afford to sacrifice even part of a father's salary. With the gender pay gap persisting, the default position tends to be men working full-time while women do the childcare and perhaps work part-time. Involved fatherhood is quite a middle-class concept, says Dr. Helen Norman at Manchester University School of Social Sciences. It's only really accessible to middle-class men who can afford to change their work. The fathers on lower incomes don't have that option. A support worker with the Housing Association in West Midlands, Richard Watkins, 32, worked all the hours he could until separation from his partner and problems with their children forced a rethink. Now his 6-year-old son lives with him, and Watkins felt he had to cut back his hours to nurture his child. We came very close to relying on food banks, he said. The only way I can survive doing this on my budget is to have it all mapped out for the next 2 years. Ultimately, he says he will have to go back to work full-time, which is a shame. The benefits of full-on fathering, the dad dividend, if you like, are both obvious and subtle. Martin Doyle, 37, a Bristol-based communication manager from Lloyds Bank, noticed that after he went part-time, there was a big difference in the son that he and his husband had adopted. It has been massively beneficial. Our son is a lot more settled and a lot more relaxed than he was. His confidence has grown. His self-belief has grown. I've been able to be there to support him. It's just that he's not representative by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, engaged fathers can also liberate women to resume careers. Indeed, women will never get close to true equality until men bend over backwards to meet them halfway, which is further reason not to do it, in my opinion. Anyway, and according to Norman, there can be a positive effect on relationships too. In households where men do sole childcare a few times a week in the early years, they will have a positive effect on the relationship over time, she says. That's demonstrably false. But could it be that the biggest beneficiary of all would be men themselves? The Being a Man festival, running from 24th to 26th November, aims to get under the skin of the masculine identity, prod it around a little to see if it falls apart. The furor over sexual harassment will tinge some segments, particularly a session called Standing Up for Her Rights, so it's more he for she, basically. But the event aims to be far broader than a single news story. Writers, actors, and performers, including Robert Webb, Alan whatever, and Simon Amstel, will explore the relentless levels of expectation heaped on men and assess whether this is responsible for statistics that suggest it is truly dismal these days to have a Y chromosome. Suicide is a predominantly male tragedy. Ditto gambling, drug overdoses, rough sleeping, or just disappearing. Rape, murder, terrorism, war, people trafficking, and domestic violence all are predominantly masculine disgraces. Whatever you go to the world, men always make up more than 90% of jail populations. Flick through today's newspaper and the chances are it will be full of the bad things that men are doing. Of course, recent weeks have been dominated by sexual harassment, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. Mass shooting and sickening murders, not to mention terror attacks, and the brutality of war, well, except Nigeria, where Boko Haram uses exclusively women. But let's set that aside. Then there are our role models: misogynist presidents, coping politicians, narcissistic sports stars, self-satisfied billionaires, airbrushed actors, heroic superheroes, alpha men, all of them. Even the average shape of a man has changed in 20 years. Guns, pecs, and necks wider than heads in some cases. There is no room for the winsome, the vulnerable, and the uncertain. I asked Hodgkinson, I guess that's good, or Hodgkinson, if he thinks a masculine mystique, a cultural insistence on strong, dominant, successful types as the only valid manifestation of manhood, is making us unhappy in the same way that the feminine mystique depressed women in the 50s and 60s. In one sense, it seems as though men are holding all the cards, he says, but the statistics show otherwise. 3 out of 4 suicides are men. 73% of adults who go missing are men. They feel they have to walk out of their own lives for one reason or another. We have to look at what masculinity means to understand this. Often it equates showing emotion with weakness. This is bottling up of shame, not wanting to let people down. The good news is that there is no shortage of books, documentaries, artists working to challenge old patriarchal norms, from Professor Green's acclaimed documentary about men and suicide to Grayson Perry's 2016 book, The Descent of Man. The downside, 2/3 of men say they don't read much. No, they don't read much of your bullshit. There's a difference. Anyway, there is an awakening around these things. There is a shift there, says Hodgkinson. Johnny Benjamin agrees. He became a mental health campaigner after contemplating suicide on a Waterloo Bridge and being talked down by a stranger. He says he sees changes coming through in the new young generation. The good thing is that it's being questioned. He observed from his own work talking to young people about mental health. There is work in schools challenging this whole kind of big boys don't cry attitude. Benjamin says it is notions of pride, shame, and honor that still do men such harm. Men need to know that it's okay to show vulnerability, subjugate every now and then, lose, cry, express their emotional turmoil. It's not just women who suffer from comparing themselves to the perfection they see in the public space. We need more sports stars, more footballers to talk about their vulnerabilities, just to say, I do struggle sometimes, I do get anxious, life isn't all money and cars. Jesus Christ, the superficiality. There are nascent campaigns calling for a more honest dialogue about the links between maleness, depression, and suicide, most notably the work done by the Campaign Against Living Miserably and the Movember Foundation. But will that ever build into a full-blown movement that reforms maleness from the inside and changes its relationship to the world? It's hard to say. Thus far, masculinism has manifested itself primarily in a niche areas such as custody laws or male victims of violence, or simply as strident misogynistic voices pushing back at feminism. Yes, because you are the problem. It's hard to see how to make a movement when you're essentially still in control of much of a society. As Sun says, quote, we're not a minority who are oppressed in any shape or form, so it's hard to find that moral space. The crisis of manhood, if it exists, I like their skepticism, is very different from that faced by women in the 50s and 60s. In some cases, some senses, it's a mirror image. Women, some at least, were saying some of us might want to work. Men, some at least, are saying some of us might want to work less. Women were saying we want to be taken seriously in public life. Men, some at least, are saying we want to be taken seriously in our private life. Both sexes are trying to live up to cultural projections rather than satisfy their own complex human needs. Men today have greater choice than women did half a century ago, but that doesn't make it easy. Women had an oppression to rail against. The outcome was a broad awakening that would not be subdued. The oppression of men is far more subtle, even self-inflicted. The awakening has barely begun. Jesus Christ. Right, so how much time do we have? Okay. Not enough time. If it were up to me, we would stay on this article for the next hour. Holy crap. Right. Let's try our best to do it, not to spend too much time on this article, but still. So yeah, first of all, no, there isn't this blokey paradise of fathers with children strapped on them in Sweden. No, this just doesn't. It's just not true. I mean, there's essentially no difference whatsoever whether you look in a public space in the UK or Italy or Bulgaria or Sweden, or it's pretty much the same thing. Yes, some of them have 1.7%, some of them have 2.8%, but lower than 5% is the absolute norm all over the I guess all over the Western world in the end. I mean, it's not getting better when you look at North America or Australia or Japan or whatever. No, it's just the way it is. And it's not going to change. Castigating fathers, more of than 80% of fathers still work full time. Yeah, it's called they need to they need to feed their families, and there's nothing wrong with that. The only portion that is sane in this article is that lady from the Manchester University who said, look, this whole thing is at best just a middle class concept. I mean, most people just cannot afford that. So yeah, it's I remember the term ventriloquism. It's basically leftist academics talking to other leftist academics, and that's pretty much it. For the rest of the planet is it's just non-existent. One more thing, and then I'll stop talking about it. There is the underlying narrative here is that Betty Friedan was not insane, and the things that she wrote in The Feminine Mystique are not complete and utter garbage with no connection whatsoever to reality. That narrative is fundamentally false. But the thing is that the underlying narrative of this particular article is that women were depressed in the 60s the way men are depressed in the late 2010s, basically. That's simply not true. In fact, the exact opposite is true. Women were far happier in the 1960s than they are now. Men's level of happiness has remained almost stable, maybe dropped a little bit in the last 50 years, but by and large is pretty much the same, whereas women's level of happiness has plummeted. Women have never been more miserable than they are now.
I mean, I wouldn't say plummeted. I mean, if you look at the actual absolute values, it changed very little. But there's sort of this consistent trend across almost all developed countries that, since about 1970, when this data was first collected, women's happiness has dropped, both in absolute terms and relative to men. But it's not a huge change.
Yeah, but still, they're getting progressively more miserable. To say that, I mean, this article outright implies the opposite, that women were worse and more miserable in the 60s than they are now. Except that's simply not true.
At least as far as the data we have, which is very unreliable, because it's like asking people how happy they are and are they actually honest? What do they actually compare it to? Like, how do you measure happiness? That's very difficult. So these relatively small changes don't really tell us much, but sort of the best evidence we have, which isn't very good, suggests that women have gotten less happy since 1970.
It's more evidence that Betty Friedan ever presented for her claims in her entire life. So
I mean, I don't doubt that there were certain women who were unhappy with being homemakers. No problem believing that, but to suggest that it's all women or most women, there's just no evidence for that whatsoever.
And besides, we read on this show a few episodes ago, maybe a month or two ago, The exact opposite trend is happening. More and more young women are starting to try again to emulate the pre quote unquote second wave feminism era to the best that they can, because admittedly the economy has changed in many ways and many things have changed, and it's a lot more difficult and, dare I say, different. But still, I mean, a lot more women are trying actually to emulate that model and not the progressive bollocks that this author and the Guardian in general is trying to shove down the throats of fewer and fewer people. Because sometimes I'm thinking that maybe the people like us make 50% of Guardian's readership. I mean, it's really no one really take them seriously anymore. It's such a garbage newspaper. Um, Also, I find it fascinating that they dedicate. I've cut quite a lot from that, but still, they dedicate an enormous amount of an enormous proportion of the article to a gay dude who adopted with his quote unquote husband. Sorry, I don't recognize gay marriage, nor will I ever. Sorry, that dude is not representative. Most men are not gay. Most men are not gay married. Most men do not adopt, and most men don't work in the financial sector in the city, so they can afford to just, well, I'm going to move to the other company because they have better childcare policies. Sorry, that's just not representative at all. And for a leftist newspaper, I find it astonishing that they don't have at least one. Maybe, I mean, if you're going to write such a long expose, and mind you, it's longer than what I read from it, I would have expected at least one, if not two or three interviews with, your average working class blokes. Just saying. And for a leftist newspaper,
They couldn't find any average working class blokes who actually were stay-at-home fathers. Unless they may be unemployed or something like that.
Fine, then go to their workplace and ask them why they don't. I mean, come on. This was the newspaper of the working class once upon a time. Well, obviously it isn't anymore. But yeah, it's weird. I mean, the all of the men that they interview here are completely unrepresentative of your average man. Completely. I mean, sorry, most men in the United Kingdom are not Norwegian Londoners. Most men in the United Kingdom are not gay married men who adopted a kid. It's just completely unrepresentative. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but then caring about the working class is so 19th century. In the 21st century, it's all about gay Norwegians.
Yeah. Well, actually, that Norwegian guy is not gay. The other one, the Scottish dude, is the gay Scots. The memes just write themselves. Yeah, it's completely unrepresentative, and this whole narrative that we're no, sorry. Also, yeah, this is another portion that I need to emphasize. Men always make up more than 90% of jail populations. Yes, but it probably doesn't help that at least in the West, men get 60% bigger sentences than women for the exact same crime, and are 3 to 5 times more likely to be incarcerated and to begin with for the exact same crime that women are not incarcerated. So yeah, whilst probably most of the criminals are men and will continue to be men for many decades and centuries to come, it probably doesn't help that ratio, the fact that there is also a very, very obvious and measurable anti-male bias in the courts, at least in the Western world.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as all this sort of whining about how our men are so poorly off, that they have these high suicide rates and so on. While that's true, it's also true that men are, men are most of the criminals and so on. It's also true that men still continue to do most of the amazing, awesome things that move humanity forward.
Absolutely.
Still, a vast majority of inventions are made by men. The vast majority of patents go to men. The vast majority of successful startups are founded by men.
Yeah. And that will not change also for the next several centuries, for sure, unless you, I don't know, make some totalitarian policy to forbid men from doing them. But even then, there will always be countries and jurisdictions that will not be that insane. So globally, things will continue to stay that way for a very long time from now. I wouldn't say forever, because there's no way to know that, but there's just no way this will change within my lifetimes, or even within my grandchildren's lifetimes. It's just not not how it works. Yeah, it's basically, and again, the feminists have a very hard time understanding this, or even addressing this. The male variability theory. Yes, most idiots are men, but also most geniuses are men, and that's fine. That's just how our species works, and it's nothing wrong with that. Acknowledging that would be a tremendous step forward.
Yeah, I mean, basically the pattern you find throughout all of history is that most of the extraordinary individuals, both in the positive and negative sense, the greatest inventors, the greatest scientists, but also the greatest criminals, the greatest dictators, and so on, were men.
Yeah, and will continue to be that way. I don't think that will ever change. Yeah, sure, there is also the off and off exception. For instance, in politics, we spoke about this a year ago, that even the occasional strong and successful female leaders, Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of South Korea, and whatnot, even they tend to have a quote unquote masculine personality. I mean, there's a reason it's still said sometimes as a joke, but sometimes as a very serious remark that Margaret Thatcher had more balls than whatever male politician of the current year. There is
Yep.
some truth to that. There is some truth to that. I mean, it takes a particular kind of personality, and yes, those kinds of personalities tend to come much more naturally and innate to men. And mind you, most men cannot be prime ministers, just like most women. But of the people that can be prime ministers, most of them will be men, and I don't think there's something inherently wrong with that. Yeah. So yeah, the completely unrepresentative article. And completely ignorant. I mean, if we're going to stay and comment it again, we're going to spend the next hour on it. So, yeah, maybe not. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, next, moving on to another very long article, but I've cut liberally from it, coming from Danish.de, which is a blog, and we don't usually include articles from blogs, but this was very interesting, so I took it anyway. Why it has become economically wrong to perform first aid on women. On the decline of civilization. In a recent comment to a blog article, someone pointed me to the following question, and it's an image of a tweet. Who are these people on the train who just stand by and watch as young girls are harassed? A question which deserves attention. By coincidence, someone else sent me an appropriate answer, namely someone from a volunteer fire brigade where the topic had been hotly debated. And there was a long quote. When in doubt, it is indeed better to defer to a female rescue worker and let her do this if possible, or to recruit a nearby woman and guiding her through the process. The only people who can lay hands on her without risk are paramedics and casualty doctors. Paragraph 323C, failure to render assistance carries a maximum of 1 year in jail or a fine. Paragraph 184I, sexual harassment, a maximum of 2 years in prison or a fine. The report doesn't even have to be filed by the victim. It can also be filed by a witness. And another paragraph, in the case of the unconscious lady, there's also a paragraph 177, sexual assault, minimum of 1 year and a maximum of 5 years in prison. So in total, paragraph 323C, failure to render assistance, is considerably cheaper. This is what Germany looks like in 2017, legally mandated social decay. End quote. Yes, that's a good point. Doing nothing means retaining your health and at most risking a 1 year sentence, and for a first-time offender, the sentence will certainly not be the maximum and will probably be suspended. If you're a public servant, it also means you won't lose your job. But if you do something you risk when it comes to bad actors, not just your life and health, but up to 5 years in jail, as well as losing the presumption of innocence, as you're promptly annihilated in the court of public opinion, and you probably lose your job without as much as a hearing. Current cases such as Weinstein and Spacey show the press's rabid frenzy. And if even firefighters have to think twice whether they can still help women without ruining themselves or landing behind bars, how bad is it for regular folks? Skipping several paragraphs and continuing with a quote by Thomas Fischer, who is a former federal judge. The law that has already been passed contains a passage on sexual harassment, Article 184 I of the Strafgesetzbuch, the criminal code. According to it, people are punished who, quote, touch another person in a sexually motivated manner and harass them thereby. This explicitly does not have to be a sexual act, i.e. behavior that violates the right to sexual autonomy, quote, in a major way. Rather, this new passage covers minor acts. Examples applied by the legislator include putting one's arm around someone's shoulder, putting one's hand on someone's knee, touching someone at the waist. Such crimes are to be punished with up to 2 years in prison. In, quote, particularly severe cases, unquote, of minor touching, the maximum penalty is up to 5 years. By the way, up until a few years, this was the maximum penalty for, quote, manslaughter in a less severe case, end quote. So severe minor touching such as groping is punished similarly to manslaughter. Women thus gain the victim status of dead people and are then called survivors. And then there follows a video of a German talk show hosted by Markus Lanz, in which a criminal lawyer recounts 2 cases. So in one, a man gropes a woman's breast, and for that offense, he gets imprisoned for 3.5 years. Then a separate case where a young man is beaten and kicked to death by a group of people, and the ringleader of that attack received a sentence of 4 years and 2 months. Skipping another couple of paragraphs. Over the last few years, I've received from various sources, including via telephone and in person, and on widely varying occasions, information, notes, and hetero instructions in which you're treated like a muggle from readers about what goes on among gays and lesbians. Some female readers have written to me over the last few years, and in particular that gender libraries in universities, which are only accessible to women, are veritable hunting grounds for lesbians. They've received so many blatant sexual advances from lesbians that they have taken to looking around whenever they are in university libraries, and they only stay in areas where men are nearby, because that is where they feel more safe. Skipping another bit here. The result is this. First aid has become impossible. Anything that even involves the risk of any kind of touching is impossible. Kindly thank people like Heiko Maas, Manuela Schwesig, Claudia Roth, and Anne Will. And there's no way back. What would happen if we wanted to revoke the law? That would lead to a complete freak-out of the lesbian front and would appear to the public as if groping would now be legalized again. This civilization is ruined. No one thought about what they invited.
Right. It sounds pretty much, although to a less severe extent, what is going on in the United Kingdom. I mean, if you remember, we read pieces of news where basically nowadays, if you see a kid drowning, it is, if you care about yourself, you're going to let the kid drown. It's just the better solution. Because if you don't, chances are you're going to be accused of some sort of kiddie fiddling, pedo, something, and no one's going to believe you, and you're going to end up in jail. Or even if you don't, if for some reason you stumble upon a less than insane judge, you'll still be branded as a pedophile in your community. And if you're lucky enough, your case gets national/international attention, and you're fucked. So yeah, people who passed all of these policies, the quote-unquote zero tolerance policies, I don't know how they call them in Germany, but I'm pretty sure the mentality is identical. They just don't understand the law of unintended consequences. They don't.
Yeah, it's just this completely deranged attitude that someone touching your breast or something is as bad as being, or even worse than being severely beaten up to within an inch of your life, because I mean that's what the penalty suggests in terms of these different crimes. Yeah. It's completely utterly insane.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is this case of this guy who groped a woman who touched her breast. That woman was not actually harmed. I mean, I guess it's unpleasant to have this happen to you. But I mean, it's not like any sort of serious harm was done.
Mhm.
And this guy is in jail for 3.5 years. It's insane.
It's brutally insane. The appropriate jail time for that would be 0. I mean, come on, sending people to jail. Oh, he touched your breast. Get over it. Fine, force him to pay some reparations, or maybe a fine, or both. I don't know. Maybe have him in a hearing in his workplace. Maybe he'll lose his job or get penalized on his wage. That's probably the worst of the worst. I mean, anything beyond that is lunacy. And I like the irony practiced by the author of this particular article. They're given the status of dead people, and then they're called survivors. It's a very good remark, because it's really it's just true. Come on. And yeah, he's also correct of maybe I wouldn't go that far and say, well, there is no way back, but it's going to be a long uphill battle to get this nonsense repealed. Because
he's absolutely right. Anyone who wants to repeal this law is going to be labeled as a sexual assault supporter, and you're probably a pervert, and you probably do that yourself. And
yeah, it's pretty much the same as we spoke about another very unpopular topic, namely the child porn laws, if you remember. And we came up then with the same conclusion. I mean, if we are to want to reform them to actually protect kids more than harm innocents, I mean, just launching such a campaign will get you lynched in the media and called a pedo and whatnot. Same in the UK. I mean, good luck arguing in public in the United Kingdom that maybe, just maybe, the zero tolerance policies on touching children are brutally insane and are demonstrably killing children. Good luck arguing that in public in the United Kingdom. You'll be branded a pedo before you can say pedo.
Yep.
And yeah, it's not getting better. I don't think that necessarily. I mean, it's a bit melodramatic, or I guess I would say overly tragic to say, "Oh, this civilization is kaput," and maybe not that far, but yeah, it is a serious issue, and it will only get worse. And mind you, there have been documented cases in. I think it was in Japan. I remember reading an article with a case from Japan where a dude. Almost went to jail. Thankfully for him, he had a friend in the cathedral media, and his case became widely known, and eventually avoided jail for quote-unquote sexual harassment. What he did was he basically stopped because there was an auto accident, and in Japan they have these kinds of defibrillators easily available precisely for the members of the public to use them in case there is an accident. And he had first aid training, and he basically cut the clothes of a lady and defibrillated her, and that's the reason she's still alive today. And he was charged with sexual harassment, and he was about to go to jail because of that. I mean, there have been cases like that. Not in Germany, not yet, but there have been cases like that, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear more of such cases as time goes on.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest here. The chances of you actually being charged with sexual harassment if you give first aid to some sort of unconscious woman are very low, but I mean, it's possible. And do you want to risk it?
Yeah, the cynical in me says absolutely not. I mean, I usually read these kinds of policies whenever I visit a country. So if I'm in a country that is not brutally insane, I'm the regular me, namely trying to be nice to everyone and whatnot. If I'm in a brutally insane country, I'm the most cynical bastard on the block by a very far margin. I don't want to speak to anyone. I don't want to help anyone. I don't want help from anyone. You can all go to hell, because it's better. I mean, I still want to get out from that country alive and not in jail. Thank you very much. So yes, I wouldn't risk it, and I wouldn't care if anyone would negatively judge me, even if it's a 1% chance or 0.5% chance. Yeah, but not doing anything is a 0% chance. It's much better.
Yep.
Right. Let's go to the next one. Unless you have anything else to add, sorry.
No. The next one is coming from Der Spiegel, and it's particularly insane. Vengeance is blood sausage, and and the original title is Rache ist Blutwurst, and I have no idea what it's presumably some sort of allusion to something, but I don't get it, so I just get a literal translation. We almost thought that everything had already been said in the debate about violence, humiliation, and sexuality that was conducted primarily under the hashtag #MeToo. But that was a mistake. A Berlin-based female journalist has recently turned things around. She wrote a text which was vicious and dangerous, but also necessary. And it suddenly became apparent what had so far been lacking in the debate: men's fear. The worry about men has thus far been one of the strangest attributes to this altercation. This strange worry that the righteous might be lumped together with the villains and perpetrators. Thus the tendency to keep the flames of outrage contained. Enter Caroline Wüffel, who turns up the heat. Last week she published her article, Sexism in the Cultural Scene. We Know It, on Zeit Online. She looks at America, where case after case is revealed, where finally neither power nor fame can protect a man who has become a perpetrator. And then she looks to Berlin, to the world of galleries, publishers, editorial teams, and restaurants, which she is so familiar with, and wonders why everyone here remains nameless and faceless. She poses the crucial question: why do we give no names? And supplies the answer herself. We cover for your deeds because we, just like the women in the US, have been told that boys will be boys, and that you don't really mean it like that. This needs to end, she writes. Thus, she created a list of 10 names who, she says, are well known in the Berlin circles she moves in. Quote, you are the restaurateur who trades cocaine for oral sex. You are the publisher who doesn't understand the word no and who greets women with an unsolicited crotch grab. The advertising man who gropes our bottoms. The artist who forces women to have sex with him. The art exhibitor who can't keep his hands to himself. The writer who is allowed to openly practice slut-shaming. The curator who can't keep his sexually explicit comments to himself. You are the journalist who presses his lips on unsuspecting women's mouths. The publisher who bullies female employees because they don't want to sleep with him. The architect who stuffs women with alcohol and drugs to plow them when they've almost passed out. Wüffel's text was, and skipping a bit here, a call to arms. Because we do need a revolution, a new sexual revolution. Like any revolution, this one will not be without its victims. This is a statement of fact, not just justification. It will affect men who didn't deserve it. We know such cases. Horst Arnold, a teacher who was falsely accused by a colleague and spent 5 years in prison. Only after his release was he exonerated, but he died shortly thereafter of heart failure. Or the meteorologist Jörg Kachelmann, who spent more than 130 days in investigative custody after a made-up accusation, and who thereafter spent years in court to restore his honor. But this new gender debate is about shifting the weight of power, and that can't be done without violence. Who has the power at any time to endanger or humiliate the other without taking any significant risk? So far, that has always been men. A woman who fights back thus becomes a nightmare vision. I can already hear the men and some women complain that men in Germany would then no longer be able to ride a lift alone with a woman. But that is an easy complaint to make if you ignore that the risk of such a ride has thus far chiefly rested on the woman's shoulders. Those mourning a carefree interaction between the sexes need to realize that from the female perspective, this has always meant the constant presence of danger, the permanent risk of physical or mental assault. It comes down to this. If women are to lose their fear, men first need to experience this fear for themselves.
And they say Mike Pence isn't ahead of his times. I mean, seriously, I'm not joking. I mean, when I worked, well, I won't name the country, but when I worked in a former Western Bloc, brutally insane, feminist-dominated country for about 2 months, I was detached from the local branch from here to there. I was supposed to work 6 months, and I negotiated down to only 2 months. They really needed me because, well, reasons anyway. That's what I practiced. I practiced the Mike Pence rule brutally, and I didn't care. I mean, like, yeah, good luck. Go and report me. I don't owe you a conversation. Fuck off. And as it turned out, I was correct in doing so because there were quite a few ladies there, very willing to make accusations. We were 4 guys who went there, and 2 girls, 2 women. And of the four guys, me and the two women were the only ones who are still employed at the end of the contract. Uh, the other three went down under various false accusations, because one of the things that one of the dudes was accused was supposed to have happened when I was there, and until this very day, I regret I haven't videotaped the moment, because that would have, at the very least, saved his career. So yeah, no, mm, I'm very much a fan of the Mike Pence rule, even before I had known Mike Pence existed. And that's one of the few ways that you can actually guard yourself today, and or just better, go the independent route. Don't work in big corporations. Fuck these bitches. Because I'm not willing to advise anyone to say, yeah, let's take the fight to them now. Yeah, no, they don't deserve it. This cunt is basically the Emily Lind of Germany, essentially. I don't know if you follow the Emily Lind controversy. She's a cunt from writing for Teen Vogue. She also basically tweeted something very similar. She said, "Oh, here's an unpopular opinion. I'm actually okay with some men having their careers ruined for the greater good, basically."
Yeah.
So yeah, no. As for these particular individuals, the Emily Lind and this lady that is quoted in this article, they're just the biggest evidence that feminism can sometimes indeed be a mental disorder in and of itself. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, and I mean, so in a way, I actually like this article because it's sort of open in its, I guess, vindictiveness and bloodthirstiness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's
refreshing.
It's more honest than most sort of feminist articles that have been written on this topic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at the very least, be open with your masonry, so we know what we're starting, where we're starting the debate from. Yeah.
Yeah. So he says, yeah, there are false accusations that happen, but I don't care. I don't care.
Yeah, which is fine. I don't care about her feeling mentally assaulted either. I could not care less. Oh my god, a dude is allowed to openly slut shame. Yeah, so who cares?
We've known this side of feminism for quite some time, though.
Of course.
I mean,
course,
this is what they say in private amongst each other.
Yeah, but the general public didn't know it. That's why it's refreshing to see them being open about it.
Yeah. Yep.
Because once the general public learns more about this particular side of feminism, which is the only honest side of feminism,
it'll be more polarizing. It'll pull the fence sitters off the fence.
Yes, and I think that's good over the long run. It's much better than to have this continued pretense that there is such thing as non-insane, non-misandric feminism. No, there isn't.
It just drives me nuts because the Agent Orange files have been out for like 5 years now.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And everybody's had at least some opportunity to take a look at them, but nobody says anything.
No. A constant
reminder. We gotta wait till it shows up in Teen Vogue, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but then again, Teen Vogue has much bigger reach than we had in 5 years ago. Although I would argue that there are many mainstream outlets that now have a smaller reach than AVFM, but at the time, that's how things were, and besides, multiple sources of these things is better than fewer sources. I mean, you can just usually when you make the argument to fence sitters, you show them this German article, and then you show the Teen Vogue cunt, and then you show them this and that, and you keep them tracing it backwards. Wait till the Agent Orange files, and before that, because there is evidence of this kind of mentality even before that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look at Jermaine Greer and Mary Daly,
especially Daly. Yes. You can make the case that look, this has always been the case. This is feminism the way it actually is, rather than what you see when they're in the pretense mode, as I like to say. Yeah. No. So in that regard, is very refreshing. Other than that, well, she's just a cunt.
But just to
And
clarify, the person who actually wrote this article is a man. It's
yeah, no, I was talking
yeah,
about the original
okay.
article that he's quoting, of course, not the author of this. The author of this article is particularly decent. I mean, it actually takes a critical look at things um, and keeps it uh, more or less neutral, because that's all you need. I mean, feminism, when evaluated objectively, always creates new anti-feminists. It's just the way it is. We don't need an overtly MRA press. We just need an objective press when it comes to sexual politics, and we won. it's, it's just the way it is.
I mean, I don't think this auction article is in any way neutral. I mean, it's really quite bloodthirsty. This whole, yeah, he acknowledges all these false accusations and so on, but that's precisely what makes it even more chilling, that he just doesn't care. We need a revolution, and if there's a couple of victims along the side, who cares? It's just history is written in blood and so on.
Yeah. Well, it came off to me, maybe because I can't read the subtleties of the German language, but it came off to me as basically this author from Der Spiegel is just describing the mentality of the original author that wrote in Die Zeit. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's how it came off to me. He's basically
No,
describing.
that's basically only that thing that's actually in quotes is, I mean, like the first half of the article or something like that is him describing this woman's article, and the latter half is basically his own take on things.
Right, right. And again, you skipped some of it, so yeah, it's probably my mistake. Nevertheless, I appreciate their honesty. But fine. They're both cunts. I'm fine with sharing cunt card to more than one person. Yeah, they're all cunts, and I prefer my cunts to be more honest, and I appreciate the honesty of cunts, because when they're honest about their cunthood, more and more well, I can't say normies on this show, can I? More and more fence eaters will see what we're talking about. Right, let's go to something else. More of a, I guess, in a way, upbeat topic. Well, not so much, but still. Coming from NRK from Norway, circumcised when he was 9 years old. Can I get my foreskin back? Kemal Knutsen Util was 9 years old when his parents made the choice for him that he wishes to have been allowed to make himself. They chose to cut off his foreskin. I could have had complications. I could have died. It was not my choice, and it is completely wrong. Kemal Knutsen Util still remembers the day he was circumcised. He was 9 years old, it was summer vacation, and it was hot outside. He and his bigger brother were in the garden of the childhood home in Turkey when they realized that the father had entered into an agreement with a man called the Abdal, or the gypsy man, or the drummer. That was a man who played drums for weddings and who had the extra job of circumcising boys of the village, according to Cemal. I was afraid, and within me I prayed to Allah that it won't happen today. Me and my brother started running and tried to hide, but then my father came and said we had to come. During the circumcision, Jamal's hands and feet were held firm. The cutter lubricated something on the foreskin, stroked it, and put a pinch on it. When I saw the knife, I was so scared that I turned around. I was probably in shock because suddenly they say it was over. I did not know anything he says. To this day, he has a burn, but what he remembers even better was the pain that haunted him for 3 weeks after the fact. Then the bandage would be taken off. It was the worst nightmare in my life. It was dry and the bandage was stuck. It hurts and I thought I would die. When the bandage finally came off, blood and fluids came out. But I did not care. I was just happy and grateful it was off. That was told during an episode of the TV series På Tro og Are, on Faith with Are, made by Are Sende Osen, which is a TV personality who met Cemal. Are is himself opposed to circumcision, but wants to learn more about the practice. The circumcision is a rather extreme way of marking belonging to his faith. I'll figure out if we're going to have something like that in my own religion, said Are, before emphasizing that circumcision is probably not something he's going to begin with in his new religion called Stiente Støvet Søskebarn. I guess the siblings or the sister of the stars of the star. It just makes no sense. And the sister of the stars of the star. I think that's the best translation. Anyway, still, I'm interested in understanding more about this drastic intervention. Circumcision is an important practice in both Judaism and Islam. In Norway, the health authorities estimate that approximately 2,000 boys are circumcised each year, and most of them are Muslim. While circumcision is a commitment in Judaism described in the Bible, circumcision is not an imposition in Islam. The practice is not mentioned in the Quran, but it is mentioned in the Hadith literature, which are written narratives about what the Prophet Muhammad said and did. Islam researcher and Arab philologist Nora S. Eggen said that circumcision is a recommended practice in Islam, but not an order. Circumcision is a highly recommended practice derived from the Prophet Muhammad, showing back to the practice from Abraham. It has the same appearance as in Judaism, but it has a lower degree of normativity in Islam because it is not an absolute order, Eggen explains. Even Jamal felt cheated when he read the Quran and did not find a word about circumcision in it. I'm pretty sure most Muslims do not know why they practice this. They circumcise their boys because they themselves have been circumcised by their fathers, said Jamal. He believes circumcision of boys under 18 should have been banned, preferably a long time ago. We say we are so modern and open-minded in Norway. It is the current year. It's 2017. But even Norway allows abuse of children by Muslim and Jewish parents, he says. While Jamal believes circumcision of children is an abuse in and of itself, others believe it would be an assault to deny religious people to perform one of their most important rituals in their religion. After the Progress Party at the May meeting went for a ban on circumcision, the leader of the Mosaic community, Erwin Kohn, stated that the resolution violated religious freedom and that it would be a signal that Jews are unwanted in Norway. If you remember, we read about that when it happened. For Jewish boy children have been circumcised for thousands of years. The religious cause is God's covenant with Abraham in the first book of Moses, where God promised Abraham blessing and many descendants. The sign of the covenant was that all men in the family should be circumcised at the age of 8 days old. Erwin Kohn explains that circumcision is a religious commitment in Judaism, but it is also about more than that. There is much in the Bible. We have many commitments, and few follow all. Nevertheless, the closure of this obligation is almost 100%. That's something to wonder about, says Kohn, who thinks it's more than about religion. I mean, it has a lot of identity to do with it too. Identity of the Jewish people, he says. One who has a different relationship to circumcision than Jamal is Jewish Nikolai Kahn. He was circumcised when he was 8 days old at the hospital in Trondheim, and for him, circumcision is about identity and belonging. I don't think I would have felt the same connection with the cultural part of Judaism if I had not been circumcised, he explains and elaborates. Nikolai does not count himself as religious and says he may be a little bit more humanistic in the mindset. Of course, I want to decide on my own body, but at the same time, I do not feel that this has been a bad choice taken for me, he explains. While some may have been circumcised for medical reasons, it is the circumcision for religious and cultural reasons that is now a controversial practice. This is because you make a permanent surgical procedure on children without their consent. It is this aspect that the TV personality Are Sende Ussen has had a hard time understanding and accepting. It is such an important decision that should be determined by the adults themselves. When you're 18, you can do what you want, but until then, I think it's a violation of fundamental rights to do this to young children who are not able to protest, says Arre. Nikolai does not think an 18-year-old limit is the solution. You can as well forbid it because that would be a ban in practice, he says. Nikolai is married to a non-Jewish woman and Judaism follows the mother's line. Therefore, if he has children, they will not be born Jewish. Had they become, he is still uncertain whether he had chosen to circumcise his son. Circumcision is indeed a contentious topic, and the debate about the practice appears on a regular basis. Following the Progress Party's decision in May, the topic has been fiercely debated. Nikolai believes it is important that circumcision be debated. It is good that the big community dares to discuss key customs in a minority religion, he thinks. We'll be happy, I think. We cannot go around and expect people to applaud it either when we do something that is so drastic, because it is a strange custom. However, what he thinks is negative with the debate is that he finds that the opposition does not listen to those who are actually circumcised. I've never perceived it to be circumcised as an abuse or an offense. But then I hear that, yes, you are offended and your parents have done this to you. I think that is problematic. Okay, skipping a larger chunk where MDM is described and some doctors give their opinions, and then final paragraphs. Jamal is now no longer a Muslim and is now the leader of the ex-Muslims of Norway, a group consisting of atheists, freethinkers, humanists, agnostics, and former Muslims who take a stand for universal rights and secularism. He is now counting himself as an atheist, but still has bodily signs that he belongs to a religion with which he has no connection. I was born into a Muslim family. That was not my choice. As a child, I was scared of ending up in hell, and that was okay too. But they even took my foreskin. Today I'm not a Muslim. Can I get my foreskin back? Asks Jamal, who also asks where the boundaries should be. If a new sect or religion demands to cut the earlobe of its kids, should we accept it?
No. How
Nope,
about
nope,
no?
nope. Yeah. Uh,
How
Fantastic.
about you cut off your own body parts, not your children's?
Yeah. I know it's an extremist position to take, but yeah. Um, the significance in this is not necessarily the points being made in the article. I mean, we've all heard these arguments a gajillion times before. The significance of this article is cultural in itself. I mean, this is a huge, very big audience TV show about faith aired on NRK, by far the most the channel with the biggest reach in the Norwegian speaking circles. I mean, I despise them, but I still watch their programs if I want to learn things about what's been going on lately in Norway, and also how to follow the way the cultural debate is working. So it is significant that such an open discussion is now aired there. 5 years ago, that the whole documentary would have been considered anti-Semitic and racist and shut down. I mean, it would have been shut down before it would have been recorded. So it's significant progress in that department for sure. It shows that it sometimes pays to vote in right-wing political parties because, again, Norway is weird. The Progress Party is the Thatcherite party. Yeah, so uh, it does help. I mean, the fact that when the Progress Party decided that they will now be adopting as their own policy and will try to make it into law one way or the other. Uh, we discussed then that it's still significant, but because they send a different signal than all of the rest of the parties, and lo and behold, they won the elections again, and now the state television is airing some of their concerns. So it pays. Sometimes it pays to vote in different politicians. Who come in with these kinds of weird ideas, such as maybe children should not be mutilated. I know it's a weird idea, but let's consider it. Let's debate it at the very least. Um, so yeah, the cultural significance of this cannot be underestimated, and the fact that it's a former Muslim, but still, I mean, he looks Muslim, he has a Muslim-sounding name. That creates a lot of cognitive dissonance amongst the progressives in Norway because they can't call him a racist because it doesn't work that way. So they'll just have to be forced to engage with his arguments, which is going to be quite a problem. It just wrong foots the pro circumcision lobby.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's all around excellent, and I mean, it covers both the Jewish angle and the Muslim angle, and I mean we've heard these arguments many times before, but just because a religious book says something doesn't mean that people in the 21st century actually do it.
Mhm.
There's lots of stuff in at least as far as Jews are concerned that are in the Bible that Jews just ignore. They don't actually kill gays. They don't kill people who've cursed their parents. They don't stone their disobedient sons and so on.
Yeah, they don't stone people who wear mixed cloth and so on and so forth. I mean, even this dude recognizes who is not even Jewish himself. I mean, he says he's an atheist, basically, or a humanist, whatever. He says, well, yeah, there are many covenants in the Bible, but and few follow them all. Well, the correct expression would have been nobody follows them all. So yeah, why not just go one regulation? Um, what extra regulation? Yeah, you have 600 regulations. You only follow about 155 of them. Yeah, how about you just follow 154 and not mutilate your kids? It's not really a big deal.
Yep.
Just saying. Uh, I mean, I'm sorry, but I always laugh when I'm called an anti-Semite for opposing circumcision. I mean, there are very few people who are more militant Zionists than I am, but nevertheless, you shouldn't be mutilating your kids. And uh, I would suggest I'm actually going to try to contact this dude, Jamal, whatever, because I'm going to suggest him to look up for the anti-circumcision groups in Israel and maybe team up with them. Those are ones that also have access to some funding, maybe organize some peer pressure. This can be done. This is a winnable battle. Sure, it's not going to be won in the next 2 years, but it's a winnable battle.
Yeah.
And it's going to have to be country by country and community by community, at least in Europe. There's no way we can hope to have a Europe-wide regulation on it. And even if we were to, everyone knows what happens to EU regulations. No one cares about them.
Yep.
So yeah, um, but it's a winnable battle, and it's just one more cultural step forward. It's great.
Okay.
Right, let's go to the last one. The last one is very hilarious. Coming from Aftonbladet, which is the propaganda official paper of the Social Democratic Party in Sweden. We, the gender researchers, are threatened with silencing. Gender research and gender science are today attacked by conservative right-wing forces and other so-called anti-genderist movements around the world. In Hungary, Germany, Poland, Russia, Brazil, and the United States and Sweden, the discipline is presented as a threat to what is claimed to be normal, natural, and right. Maybe because it is. Researchers who reviewed these movements in Europe describe how they spread in recent years from country to country. The threats to gender science and gender researchers, according to these movements, are considered to be varied. It may be the nation, the child's gender identity, the heterosexual family, but also the free academic thinking and freedom of speech that need to be protected from what is perceived as the ravages of gender science. Equality work is also questioned sharply. In Sweden, this political wave, known as gender science, can be called the Church of the Church and is represented as if it were a dogma imposed not only on other researchers, but with the entire university ecosystem. Even here in Sweden, gender equality is called into question, and that what is perceived to be natural differences between men and women is said to not be taken into account. In addition to the subject of gender stereotyping and being questioned on highly unscientific and strong political grounds, this type of systematic attack is likely to legitimize the threat of religious fundamentalists and ethno-nationalists to individual gender researchers in different disciplines. Oh, cry me a river. This does not rarely lead researchers to cease their research focus. They cannot live with the threats directed at them. An environment that wants to limit the space for open and critical research is spreading. I wish that were true. What does gender research do? Yes, many of us emphasize the importance of challenging what is perceived as a given and posing new research questions, which is one of the Academy's most important assignments and crucial for the emergence of new knowledge. Gender science is also not alone in this. Important scientific, technological, and medical achievements have come about by studying and critically reviewing existing knowledge. Gender researchers have experience in studying how knowledge and meaning are created. We ask ourselves, what are the conditions for knowledge? How does the truth come to be true? Whose knowledge becomes valid and who is important? One example is in when women's science developed at the university a few decades ago. Gender researchers questioned that the research focused on men and that it was the role of men in history that was made visible and that the male researchers' work was important. The knowledge was pointed out was all too limited. With the emergence of women's science, more science was required. New issues were needed and dominant understanding and perspectives were challenged. Women also appeared to be historical and social subject. A more complex understanding emerged. No, it didn't. Today, many gender scientists and gender researchers work extensively on the basis of what is called the intersectional perspectives. Yeah, that's a feature, that's a bug, not a feature. Anyway, governance in society needs to be challenged on the basis of a complex understanding of how different principles of sex, gender identity, racism, sexuality, function, class, and age are related to each other and create inequalities. So the progressive stack for everyone. How will this be done is debated vigorously among gender researchers, which is a sign of a dynamic and vital research tradition. Gender studies and gender research, with its academic-based reflexiveness, develop new perspectives that allow more questions to be asked and new areas of knowledge can emerge. It also means that inequalities can become visible and problematized. It is particularly important at times when inequality is normalized, sexually questioned, racism is clear, and segregation is getting stronger, and Islamophobia expands, and conditions deteriorate for those who do not live in accordance with the strong standard of functioning. We share the concern that the freedom of the academy is threatened, but it is not the gender science that accounts for this threat. This view should be reversed against anti-democratic movements and the harassment of researchers who carry these movements. Let me play you a sad song for the world's smallest violin. I mean, really, the authors of this article, there are five of them. Uh, they basically complain that they are the people who insisted and installed an almost DDR-like system in particularly in Uppsala and Lund universities in Sweden, and more recently at Stockholm's university as well. And they're the one complaining that they have their freedom threatened. Yeah, your freedom to silence everyone else, yes, is threatened. That's good.
But these people are problematic. They have to be silenced.
Yeah, no. Again, uh, besides the stupidity of these authors, let me read the name of the authors. Paulina de los Reyes, that's very Swedish. Mattias Eriksson, Charlotte Holgersson, Lena Martinsson, and Diana Molinari, again, very, very Swedish. Yeah, so it took 5 gender researchers to write this this crap. It's amazing because they don't say it's an open letter. No, they say these are the 5 authors. And so, amazing.
So they like alternate. You write one paragraph, and the second person writes a paragraph, and so on.
Yeah, and then check for age inequalities and racial inequalities, and who is a native, who is an immigrant, and who's white and who's not. So they make sure they're perfectly represented according to the progressive stack. In a more serious manner, in addition to the obvious stupidities written by these 5 authors in this article is also significant because they are starting to feel the heat. They're finally starting to get the pushback is basically coming back into their bubble. The bubble is now being punctured. They can no longer pretend that the individuals with a different opinion about things exist, because again, let's remember 5 or 10 years ago this would have been impossible. 10 years ago, everyone was assumed to have these idiots' opinion, and basically anyone else that didn't exist. Nowadays, even in Sweden, they can no longer claim that. It is obvious that there are quite a lot of people, possibly even a majority, that don't believe the way they do and perceive them as basically the church of progressivism trying to impose dogmas on everyone else, which is, in my opinion, a very, very accurate perception, particularly in Sweden. So yeah, in this regard, it is a very, very significant article because they're now starting to feel the heat. Now, of course, they're going to exaggerate and they're going to complain, oh my God, we're being threatened. Get lost. Get lost. It comes with the territory. When you come out in public, yes, you're going to get some nasty words thrown at you. It's the nature of the beast. I bet I get far more abuse than any of these clowns got in their entire lives.
But then you're also a communist Nazi, so it comes with the territory.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be. In fact, I hope that this gets worse for them. I think it's not bad enough for them. Oh well, some gender researchers might have to abandon their research and their work. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's fantastic news. That's not something to be complaining about, especially in Sweden when the overwhelming majority, or if not 100% of this nonsense, is funded by the taxpayers. Yes, fewer taxpayers being spent on gender research. That's fantastic news. That's not that's not something to complain about. It's great news.
Yeah, basically, these researchers have had very comfortable, cushy jobs, and they've basically had no one who dares disagree with them for so long that they've just grown accustomed to this privilege, and they've grown blind to this privilege, and they just kept telling other people to check their privilege, but never checked their own.
Meanwhile, Sweden has had how many bombings in the last 6 months? That their media will almost refuses to talk about.
Yep. I mean, in Malmö, it has now come to a point where there are about 2 grenade attacks per week just in one city. Yeah, I mean, and some of them I know of them because there are videos about them. Videos with them. I mean, as with the moment itself, published on YouTube. I mean, there's not even And some of these bombings are not even recorded as bombing is anymore in police reports. I mean, it's full madness. Nobody really knows how many bombings occurred in the last 6 months in Sweden. It's just a lot of them. I mean, at the very least, about 3 per week, and that's in a good week.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and oh my God, Islamophobia is growing. Well, maybe, but then again, implying that Islamophobia is bad, and again implying that Islamophobia is real, because again, there is no. I mean, fear of some manifestations of Islam is not irrational. It's in fact a very very rational position to take. Again, taking a walk to Scania's capital city, that would be Malmö, will tell you quite a lot about that. Um, I hope next time I'll go to Sweden, I'll have the time to go and videotape there too. But anyway, I videotaped in other progressive and diverse and enriched areas in the capital city in Stockholm, and you can see for yourselves. It's on my channel. It's not a particularly nice place to be, and again. And it's not just bombings. I mean, in Rinkeby, for instance, and in Tensta, which are two very enriched and progressive and multicultural. Well, actually, they're very monocultural because one of them has 99% Somalis in it. But anyway, in those places, you can see a lot of spontaneous car combustion. That is to say, if you don't conform to the norms of the community, you'll get your car burned. Or if you adhere to the wrong religion, that is to say, any religion except Islam, your car might suffer from spontaneous combustion. There are many, many, many other things that are occurring, that not just bombings. Meanwhile, these clowns are going to complain that, oh my God, my freedom to force everyone else to shut up about the realities in Sweden is being curbed. Really? No, you can still spout your nonsense. We're just going to spout something else back, and we're going to disagree, and there's nothing bad with that.
Yep.
As for this pompous thing, oh yeah, we emphasize the challenging of what is perceived as given. Yeah, that's basically the half-baked description of normkritisk, which is an exclusively Scandinavian concept. Again, what we did is a more complex understanding emerged. No, it didn't. What emerged was a soup of completely unrelated concepts, and now everyone has to question it. I mean, I'm waiting for the moment. I hope that moment will not come, because all of these clowns will end up fired and jobless, or maybe working at IKEA or something. But I mean, if these clowns aren't stopped, I'm pretty sure we'll soon learn that gravity is patriarchal, and maybe we should question gravity. I mean, because when your stance is, and I've seen this on a leftist dude, a leftist blog, who is also anti-progressive, and he says, if your stance is progressive, that means you're always going to progress, because you don't have any defined end game. You don't have well, we want to progress only up to this point. You don't have any limit. If you're a progressive, that means you will always want to progress, and eventually you're going to have to progress into questioning gravity, and eventually progressing back into the, well, not 7th century necessarily, but definitely 15th century. I mean, I didn't have the time to include in this show, but I'll include in one of my videos of Periodic Insanity. By the way, that Man-Free Festival, yeah, it's going to be organized. Yeah, hey, yay, sex segregation in public spaces. Just as Iran is preparing to, Iran and Saudi Arabia actually abolished some of it, and Iran is preparing to abolish some of it. Sweden is getting it back. Isn't progress fantastic?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, please.
I've no problem with sex segregation, as long as it's in private spaces. And if you want to have your man-free festival, go ahead. I mean, I wouldn't want to go to it anyway, so I don't care.
Yeah, I agree. But that's the thing. I mean, they want to have their cake and eat it too. On one hand, you can have man-free festivals, but heaven forbid you open a private male-only club.
Yep.
I mean, that's what I will say when I'll publish that video. Well, first I need to record it. The same thing. I mean, I'm very pro all sorts of voluntary segregation on private property. for any reason or no reason whatsoever. I mean, for I don't know, by academic preferences, by sex, yes, by race, by height, by age, by whatever. I don't care. As long as it's on private property on your own shekels and it's voluntary attendance, I don't care. And because freedom of association starts with the freedom not to associate. But in Sweden, they want to have their cake and eat it too. On one hand, they want their men-free festivals, but on the other hand, everyone else is a patriarchal shitlord if he points out their hypocrisy, or maybe, heaven forbid, they dare to question their quote-unquote research, and maybe some researchers might cease their research focus. Can you imagine the tragedy?
Yeah.
Yeah,
How would the Swedish ever deal with that?
yeah. I mean, can you imagine
All these hundreds of millions of Swedish people desperately waiting for the next paper on normkritisk gender perspectives of gender fluid penguins will be disappointed.
Yeah, indeed.
Or the fact that wolves are actually sexist.
Wolves are sexist.
Yeah, and alpha wolves are a myth, actually. They don't exist.
Fair enough.
Just a social construct.
Of course. Biology itself is a social construct, of course, which is actually a real topic of discussion. Was at Stockholm University at one moment.
But then, in social constructs, also just social constructs. So I don't know.
Yeah, well,
social constructs all the way down.
Yeah. Well, welcome to postmodernism madness. Right. So with that said, I think we can safely wrap this up. I won't be here on December the 1st because it's the national holiday, and I'll go to headbang on a rock concert, of course. But I'll be here on December the 8th for sure. December is going to be quite a very complicated month because I also need to get to. Yeah, no worries. I'll broadcast from away again. I'll be here on December the 8th for sure. And that's all of the things I had to say, but I'm pretty sure you have a few more things to say as well.
Yeah, I will also be around on the 8th of December. In the meantime, I invite you to visit my blog, which is at orthogonalideas.com, which I've admittedly neglected a bit in the last couple of weeks, but just today I've put up a new post, a book review of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago, which is a great book, very important book about the prison camps of the Soviet Union. So if that interests you, go on and head over to orthogonalideas.com. And then I guess I'll see you in 2 weeks. Until then, take care and take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone.